Congratulations. You've just woken up in a city that shouldn't exist. It's not Cairo, not Luxor, not any Egypt you remember from school books or documentaries narrated in British accents. No, this place is weirder, newer, too new, too empty. You're lying on something that wishes it were a bed. Thin woven reeds, dry and cracked, poking your back through brittle linen. The scent hits you before your eyes even open. Burnt myrrh, sun-warmed limestone, and sweat that's been soaked into stone for centuries. There are no walls around you, just pale columns, sun-bleached and cracked like old teeth. The sky above is a sheet of blistering gold, cloudless, endless, and merciless. The kind of sky that has no sympathy for skin or memory. You sit up, slowly. Your back aches. Your mouth tastes like sand and something metallic. You touch your lips. Blood? No, just the coppery tang of this air. Even the oxygen here feels like it's been sifted through parchment and ash. In front of you is the city, Amarna, or as it was once called, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. The name sounds poetic, almost romantic. Don't be fooled. This isn't Rome. This isn't Athens. This is something stranger, a dream built in a rush, burned out in a decade, and left behind like a bad idea. Imagine someone took all the power of Egypt, squeezed it into one man's obsession, and dumped it here in the desert like a sunlit hallucination. You stand. Your feet are bare. The sand is not soft. It bites. There are no birds singing, no carts rolling, just wind. The kind of wind that carries secrets, and maybe ghosts. Ahead, a massive boulevard stretches like a scar through the heart of the city. The buildings are low, their walls pale and geometric, undecorated by gods or beasts. No Anubis, no Horus, no Isis, just discs. Everywhere you look, the symbol of Aten, the sun itself, shining down rays tipped with tiny human hands. Open-palmed, reaching, as if they want to touch your face. You're not dreaming. Not yet, but you're close. From behind a half-crushed doorway, a voice murmurs a prayer. Not to Osiris, not to Ammonius, to the sun, the Aten, the god without myth, without face, without story. A god that doesn't whisper. It blinds. And you? You're here to meet his queen. They say she was more powerful than any pharaoh before her, more beautiful than any goddess ever carved, more elusive than any mummy ever found. Nefertiti, the woman whose name means the beautiful one has come. But come from where? And to do what? She was born in shadows, rose in mirrors, vanished in sand. Some say she died quietly in a palace bedroom. Others believe she took the throne as pharaoh and ruled alone, masked behind false names and painted lies. But here's the strange part. You know her face. You've seen it. You could describe it in your sleep. The elegant neck, the high cheekbones, the unblinking gaze. A face sculpted so perfectly it outlived empires. And yet, you've never seen her tomb. You don't know where her bones rest. No one does. It's as if she refused to die properly. A priest passes you. He doesn't see you. You're not truly here. Just drifting. A soul watching shadows. He carries incense and mutters the same phrase again and again. Aten sees all. Aten sees all. But no one sees you. Except maybe her. Beyond the boulevard, atop a staircase worn by sandals long turned to dust, her palace looms. Less opulent than you'd expect. There are no gold columns, no velvet drapes, just heat and silence, and something else, expectation, as if someone is waiting for you inside. But don't rush. Let the city speak to you first. Let the wind pull secrets from between the stones. Smell the resin still clinging to the altar fires. Watch the sun press its pale hands across the walls like a desperate lover. Because tonight, you're not just visiting the ruins of a city. You are entering the memory of a queen who refused to be forgotten. A queen who perhaps died twice. Once in flesh, and once in name. And somewhere in this heat, in this dream, in this strange golden nowhere, she's still watching. You walk, or float. The line between body and memory blurs easily in Amarna. Dust coils around your ankles like smoke, like forgotten silk, like something trying to remind you of its name. The city feels less like a place and more like a performance that's already ended. The actors are gone. The stage is cracked, but the script still echoes faintly, etched in stone and silence. And at the center of this vanishing act, a woman who may never have existed. Let that settle in. You know her name, Nefertiti. You know her face. Don't pretend you don't. That famous bust, with its serene lips and unfazed gaze, has stared into the souls of tourists since 1912. But everything else? The dates, the deeds, the body? Gone. Sandblasted from history like an inconvenient truth. Some historians call her mysterious. Others say overhyped. A few whisper that she's just a composite invention. A mythical femme fatale crafted by ancient propaganda, foreign collectors, and modern museum lighting. And yet she endures. More than any other queen. More than most kings. Why? You stand at a crumbling wall that once formed part of her private chamber. The paint is almost gone, but not entirely. There, look closely. A sliver of color, a fingertip of ochre, the outline of an elegant chin. The gods were erased from these walls. But not her. Not completely. It's as if the limestone itself couldn't bear to forget her. Here's the strange part. There are no official records of her death. No funerary texts. No public mourning. No sarcophagus with her name carved into alabaster. And this is Egypt, mind you, a culture that obsessed over death with a level of precision modern accountants would envy. When a pharaoh died, the country wailed. When a queen passed, they carved poems into eternity. But when Nefertiti vanished, silence. A sharp, curated silence. It's as if she didn't die. She was deleted. You walk past what used to be the royal garden. Or maybe it was just a courtyard where servants whispered in sandals slapped against sun-baked stone. It smells faintly of something sweet. Lotus, maybe. Or just the memory of it. Theories trail her like incense smoke. Some say she fell out of favor and was quietly disposed of, poisoned or exiled. Her name scratched off records by resentful priests and opportunistic scribes. Others believe she changed her name and ruled in disguise, slipping into history as Pharaoh Nefertiti, a figure just as foggy and footnoted as she is. And then there are those who say she died in childbirth, or from plague, or perhaps she simply refused to die at all, ascending instead into myth, like a whisper swallowed by desert wind. But you want to know the most disturbing theory? The one no Egyptologist wants to put in a journal? That Nefertiti was never real. That she was a construct, a composite, a political puppet, a PR campaign in human form. Because let's face it, her story is too perfect. The loyal wife, the mother of 6 daughters, the elegant co-ruler, the one who stood beside her heretic husband and smiled while he smashed the gods and rebuilt the world in sunlight. And then, poof, she's gone. And all we're left with is that face. That impossibly symmetrical, oddly modern, suspiciously idealized face. No wrinkles, no flaws, no story that we can pin down without it wriggling away like a myth with an attitude problem. You touch the wall. It's warm. Maybe from the sun. Maybe from memory. Did she live? Did she rule? Did she plot? Or pray? Or poison her way to power? Or is the Nefertiti you think you know simply a mirage created by fragments of stone, eager academics, in a society that loves a pretty mystery. After all, we built her tomb in our minds, one carefully air-conditioned museum at a time. But don't worry, we'll get closer to her, one breath of dust at a time, one lie, one statue, one missing bone at a time. Because whether she lived, ruled, or never was, she's waiting. And she doesn't care if you believe in her or not. She just wants you to keep looking. It's still watching you, even now, as you walk through the fractured alleys of Amarna, trailing your fingers across sunburnt walls. You feel her gaze, unblinking, tilted slightly upward, as if she's already grown tired of your questions. You haven't seen it yet in this dream, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. The bust, that face, perfectly preserved, perfectly impossible. Berlin, 1912. An awkward German archaeologist named Ludwig Borchardt stumbles upon it in a dusty, decaying house in Tel El Amarna. The room is dark. A shaft of sunlight splits the dust. And there, half buried in rubble and forgotten prayers, she appears. Not broken, not buried, not eroded, intact. Her high cheekbones arch like marble cliffs. Her lips are full but unsmiling, painted with a red that hasn't faded in over 3,000 years. Her neck stretches upward like it's made of liquid silk. Her eyes, well, one is missing. The left one, gone, but doesn't matter. The remaining eye is enough to paralyze you. And in that moment, Ludwig doesn't find statue. He finds a ghost with a PR team. Let's pause. You need to understand just how wrong this bust is. Not because it's fake. No, there's no consensus there. But because it's too good, too modern, too symmetrical, too editorial. Where are the wrinkles? The imperfections? The signs of age? She had 6 children, ran a palace, possibly ruled Egypt. And yet, her face looks like it's been curated for an Instagram filter called Eternal Deity. The paint is pristine. The craftsmanship? Sublime. The material? Limestone. Not gold, not alabaster. Just simple, soft limestone that somehow refuses to decay. It's almost as if the bust wasn't made to be seen in her lifetime, but in ours. As if it was meant to survive everything. Dynasties, disasters, world wars. Just to land behind glass in Berlin and wait for you to stand in front of it, blinking. She doesn't blink back. Here's a detail you might have missed. The bust has no inscriptions, no cartouches, no name, no royal titles. It's just her, as if the sculptor, likely Thutmose, believed her image required no introduction. And maybe he was right. Some scholars believe the bust is an unfinished prototype, never meant for public eyes. A test model. Others say it was a decoy, a temple idol, a relic of propaganda created to project beauty, order, and divinity in an age of political chaos. Because remember, Amarna was a mess. Akhenaten had declared war on the gods. Nefertiti had become the face of a revolution that shattered millennia of religious tradition. The people were confused. The priests were furious. The empire teetered on collapse. So what did they do? They gave them her face. Not a speech. Not a god. Not a plan. Just the serene, perfect visage of a queen who never seemed tired, never aged, never questioned the sun or its chosen mouthpiece. And somehow that was enough. It worked, at least for a while, until it didn't. When the dynasty fell, and the old gods came roaring back with sharp knives and angry priests, that bust should have been smashed, ground into gravel, buried in the Nile. But it wasn't. It was forgotten, hidden in a side room, like a rumor Egypt didn't quite dare to kill. And when it was found, she was still watching. Now she sits in a museum room lit like a cathedral. Tourists shuffle in, whispering like pilgrims. They take photos, though no flash is allowed. They stare in her eyes, looking for something, anything, human, but she offers no clues. Only perfection, only silence. Because that's the real magic, isn't it? She's not just an image of a queen. She's a question, a mirror, a challenge. Who gets remembered? Who gets erased? And why is it always the beautiful ones who survive without explanation? You turn a corner in ancient Amarna and catch your reflection in a fragment of polished stone. It warps your face slightly, distorts it. Not ugly, just human, unlike hers. But don't worry, we'll peel back the stone. We'll keep digging, because while the world may have fallen for her face, her story is buried deeper. And down there, it's not nearly as pretty. Let's talk about the man beside the myth, or rather, the man behind the eclipse. Because if Nefertiti is a question in stone, then Akhenaten is the answer no one asked for. And yet, there he is, towering over history like a half-remembered fever dream. Your sandals crunch softly on the gravel of Amarna's ceremonial road. The morning light burns white-hot across your skin. You shield your eyes, but it's no use. The sun is everywhere. It dominates the sky with the same uncomfortable insistence that it once dominated the soul of this pharaoh. Before he was Akhenaten, he was Amenhotep IV, born of the great god Ammonius, heir to a long and stable line. A good Egyptian boy with all the privileges of dynasty. But something in him broke, or clicked, or ascended. No one agrees, because one day, quite suddenly, he stopped believing. He looked at Egypt's 1,000 gods, with their crocodile heads and sky sisters and death-eating jackals, and saw only noise. Rituals, corruption, priests fat on offerings and incense. Temples more powerful than kings. Religion had become an empire unto itself. So he did what no pharaoh before him dared. He burned it down. He erased Ammonius, the invisible creator God worshipped for centuries, from every temple wall. He moved the capital from Thebes to this new, strange place, Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, and he crowned a disk of sunlight as the one true God, not a warrior, not a beast, not a father of storms or a judge of the dead, just light, pure, naked light. The Aten was no god of mercy or vengeance. It didn't speak, it didn't love, it simply shone. If that makes you uncomfortable, good, because it made Egypt deeply, profoundly uneasy. You see, gods in Egypt weren't just celestial decorations. They were infrastructure. You prayed to Thoth for wisdom. You called on Isis for healing. You bartered with Osiris for safe passage into death. But the Aten didn't barter. It didn't answer prayers. It didn't care. It just watched. A disk in the sky, bleeding light, extending dozens of long, spindly rays, each one ending in a tiny human hand, outstretched, reaching down, stroking your face, your food, your breath, like a lover or a parasite. And Akhenaten loved it. He bathed in it. He meditated in it. He wrote hymns to it so flowery and obsessive they made modern translations feel like breakup letters to the sun. And always beside him, always stood Nefertiti. Was she a believer? A co-conspirator? A prisoner in eyeliner? We'll never know. But what we do know is that this pharaoh didn't just change gods. He changed art. Walk through Amarna and nothing looks like old Egypt. Gone are the stiff, perfect bodies and eternal poses. Instead, you'll find bloated bellies, wide hips, elongated skulls, scenes of intimacy and strange vulnerability. Akhenaten made himself ugly. Not grotesque, not monstrous, just honest, soft, slouched, human. He painted himself kissing his daughters. He carved himself kneeling to the sun. He ordered images of himself naked and frail, sagging chest, drooping chin, alien features exposed in divine humility. It was terrifyingly radical. Because pharaohs were gods. But this one made himself a worshiper. He stripped Egypt of its anchors. He alienated its priests. He called himself the son of the Aten, the only one who could speak with the light. And in doing so, he placed himself between God and humanity. Let that sink in. He replaced the priesthood with himself, the temples with his palace, the pantheon with a spotlight. And you, if you lived here in this city, in this time, you had no choice but to stare at the sun and pretend you understood. Did he believe it? Truly? Or was it power disguised as purity? Some say Akhenaten suffered from a genetic disorder. Others say he was simply the world's first monotheist, a prophet before prophets, doomed to collapse beneath his own vision. But here's what matters. He chose the sun. He abandoned centuries of tradition, of gods with stories and chaos and compassion, for a disk. And the woman who stood beside him, she didn't flinch, not once. But we'll come back to her. Because while the pharaoh soared too close to his god, the queen stayed grounded, watching, waiting, preparing. And in time, it would be her face, not his, that survived the fire. Welcome to the strangest sermon you've never been invited to. There are no hymns, no drums, no chanting, no incense, smoke curling around the ankles of a bronze idol. Just light, relentless, flat, inescapable light. You've entered the inner courtyard of Amarna's great temple. Not that it feels sacred, not in the usual way. No colossal statues of gods, no animal-headed guardians, no darkness to hold mystery. Everything here is open air, exposed to the sun like a body on an autopsy table. This isn't worship. This is surveillance. God is now a disk, unblinking, untouchable, unimaginable. The Aten doesn't have a face, a story, a gender. No brother to duel, no mother to birth him, no underworld throne. He simply is, a burning circle in the sky, with rays that reach down to caress fruit, bread, breath, womb. There is something eerily modern about it, isn't there? No myth, no metaphor, just raw energy and light. Imagine being an Egyptian farmer whose family has prayed to Osiris for generations. You've built shrines. You paid tithes. You told your children bedtime stories about Anubis weighing your heart. Now, suddenly your gods are dead, scratched from the walls. And in their place, a disk. Your temples are gutted. Your priests replaced by the royal couple, who now claim divine access to the sun. And if you want to pray, you don't kneel in darkness. You stand in blinding daylight and let the Aten burn your skin. It's not intimacy, it's exposure. And Nefertiti? She doesn't flinch. She stands beside Akhenaten in carving after carving, arms raised, receiving the same sun rays that reach toward her husband. She becomes not just a queen, but a divine channel. She and Akhenaten are the only humans allowed to speak to the Aten. Everyone else is in the audience. You begin to understand. This isn't just religion. It's architecture, political architecture, total control wrapped in sunlight. The Aten doesn't require stories. He doesn't demand understanding. He doesn't even offer comfort. He offers visibility. Everything is visible. Everything is in the open. In the old world, death was a transition, a journey through the underworld. You met gods, faced trials, reached judgment. In the world of Aten, there is no afterlife, no judgment, no underworld drama, no resurrection. Only this life, only this moment, only the sun above you and the pharaohs who mediate its warmth. It's more terrifying than any myth, because it means the gods have abandoned the story. You pause beside a relief carved on pale sandstone. It shows Nefertiti cradling a child beneath the extended rays of Aten. Each sunray ends in a hand offering the royal couple Ankh the breath of life. Not the people, not the priests. Just them. The rest of the world? You get whatever's left over. There's no room for priests in this religion. No room for oracles. Just two royal bodies and one god who doesn't speak. This is where it gets strange. You begin to feel sympathy for the old gods. The jackals, the vultures, the sky cows. They were flawed, yes, but at least they told stories. At least they loved, fought, mourned. Aten doesn't love you. He just shines on you, and that shine doesn't heal. It watches. Imagine your entire life unfolding under an eternal gaze. Not the warm light of inspiration, the oppressive light of exposure, of surveillance. Even your dreams feel too bright. And yet, Nefertiti flourished here. She didn't just adapt. She ascended. In depictions from this period, she's shown almost equal in size to Akhenaten. She leads ceremonies. She smites enemies. She wears the blue crown of kingship. In some scenes, she's the one receiving offerings, not her husband. The line between queen and co-ruler vanishes in the light. Did she believe in Aten? Or was she just clever enough to bend sunlight into power? That's the thing about light. It can illuminate, but it can also blind. So while Akhenaten stared upward, rhapsodizing to his disc-shaped deity, Nefertiti stared forward, into the people, into the court, into history, and in that blinding glare, something subtle happened. She became the myth, not the god, not the priest, not the subject, the myth. Because when the gods become discs and kings become prophets, only queens can survive in silence. And her silence was strategic. Soon, the sun would set. Soon, Aten would fade. And when that happened, Nefertiti would need something far more powerful than light. She would need a second name. But first, we must walk deeper into her city, into the gardens where her daughters played, into the secrets no light ever reached. You've left the temple now, or rather, it has let you go. The sun still clings to your skin like syrup, and everything you see is edged in white. Walls, steps, sand, thoughts. Amarna doesn't allow shadows to grow. Not easily. Not here. But now something softens. You pass beneath a colonnade, and the light breaks into fragments, shafts and ribbons that flicker like whispers through the marble bones of a house long forgotten by time, but not by its owner. This is her home, her sanctuary, her seat of silk and stone, the house of Nefertiti. And yes, the name is real. This place, nestled within the sacred geometry of Amarna, was known as the House of the Beautiful One Has Come. It sounds poetic, doesn't it? Almost theatrical, like a line from a play you once read, but never understood. But here, under this fractured arch, those words carry weight. The Beautiful One, the one who has come. Not born, not made. Come. From where? No one knows. No one ever knew. You step over the threshold. The stone is cracked, but the doorway still stands tall. Carved with care, once painted with ochres and lapis, now faded to the bone gray of memory. Inside, silence. Not the silence of abandonment, the silence of preservation. You inhale, and though it's been thousands of years, you smell her. Not perfume, not really, but something floral and thick. Crushed petals and sandalwood oil. A scent worn by a woman who knew she was being watched. Every step, every breath, a performance curated not for the present, but for the immortality of perception. The rooms are larger than you'd expect, bright, angular, devoid of the clutter of royalty. She didn't live surrounded by gold or slaves or treasures. She lived surrounded by control. Every wall, every column, every open-air window was designed with intention. To let in the sun, but not too much. To frame her face, but not overshadow it. To offer power, but cloaked in grace. Here, she raised 6 daughters. 6 children born not just into royalty, but into divine choreography. In wall paintings, they swarm around her feet, playing, weeping, laughing, and dying. Yes, dying, because not all 6 survived. Some faded early. The records are unclear. The names are tangled. The grief is soft, hidden beneath layers of idealized motherhood and divine purpose. But this house, it remembers. You walk past what was once a nursery. The tiles are shattered, but the dust holds impressions. Tiny sandals, forgotten dolls, a smear of red pigment that might have been laughter once. In another chamber, a wide bench stretches beneath a mural, long faded, of Nefertiti alone, her head bowed, not to Aten, but to something else, something older, forgotten, possibly forbidden, a moment of humanity, or perhaps heresy. This house wasn't a palace in the traditional sense. It was a theater, a soft, golden stage where she ruled with glances and gestures, where she plotted survival under the gaze of a god with no mercy. You can almost hear the quiet click of her footsteps, bare feet across polished limestone, the hush of veils, the rustle of linen robes sewn by royal artisans too terrified to breathe wrong in her presence. And yet, despite all this grandeur, one thing gnaws at you. She was trapped here. The house of the beautiful one may have been filled with light, with scent, with music, but it was still a cage, a gilded enclosure designed to keep her both visible and contained. Because Nefertiti wasn't just queen, she was the face of a revolution, a figurehead in a world where gods had become geometry and kings had become poets. She didn't belong to herself anymore. She belonged to the light, to the image, to Aten, to the myth. And in a world ruled by a god who never blinked, how do you rest? Where do you go to be ugly? To weep? To fear? Nowhere. So she smiled. In every carving, she smiled. Eyes forward, chin raised, crown tilted like she wasn't holding up the weight of a collapsing world. Because while Akhenaten dreamed of gods, Nefertiti managed the consequences. And this house, this silent, sunlit shell, was where she became not a woman, but a symbol, an icon, a queen with no tomb. Because maybe she knew deep down that this house, this face, this myth would have to be enough. And perhaps it was. Power never smells clean. Not truly. You may dress it in flowers, soak it in oils, sprinkle it with cedar dust. But underneath it all, power carries a scent far more ancient: blood, sweat, and fear. And in the case of Nefertiti, add perfume. Lots of it. Because while Akhenaten was busy reconfiguring the heavens, Nefertiti mastered something far more complex: the court, the rituals, the alliances, the ecosystem of ambition that hummed behind the alabaster walls of Amarna. You don't survive a revolution just by praying to the sun. You survive by smelling danger before it arrives, and sometimes by wearing a better scent. Her signature perfume, if the fragments found in her chambers can be trusted, was made of myrrh, lotus, cardamom, henna, and something darker. Something no record dares to name. A resin perhaps, or a drop of poison. Because make no mistake, Nefertiti's world was not just sunlit colonnades and poetic murals. It was a battlefield, and its weapons weren't always swords. They were glances, rumors, unspoken threats whispered behind linen curtains, while the high priest of Aten smiled too sweetly during morning prayer. You walk now through the administrative quarter of Amarna. The dust here is heavier. It clings to you like paperwork. Every step feels like a negotiation. This is where decisions were made. Grain shipments, temple taxes, marriage alliances, assassinations cloaked as divine interventions. All of it passed through her hands. Nefertiti wasn't just a consort. She was a tactician, a diplomat, a political animal dressed in flowing linen and sacred titles. She knew who to reward, who to exile, who to kill, or better, who to let kill themselves quietly with just enough push. And all of this without ever raising her voice. That's what made her terrifying. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to bleed. She dripped power, softly, elegantly, like perfume on a pulse point. Imagine her walking into a council meeting, angst jangling softly, gold bangles like chains of sunlight. She nods once, and a nobleman knows he's either being promoted or erased from history. Because here's the truth. When a woman in ancient Egypt rises too high, she must do one of two things: hide behind her husband or become a god. Nefertiti did both, and then neither. She carved her own space. She made herself essential. Even the Aten, silent, blind, burning, needed her. In almost every relief from this period, the sun's rays don't just touch Akhenaten. They touch her, often first. The breath of life is pressed to her nostrils, her breasts, her lap. She isn't a passive vessel. She is the ritual. But with every offering, every tribute, every breath of incense offered in her name, she knew it wouldn't last. Because in the shadows of Amarna, the old gods still whispered. The priests of Ammonius waited. The soldiers grew restless. The people grew hungry. And the daughters she birthed, dressed in sacred ribbons and Aten amulets, began to die, one by one, from plague, from grief, from something else. No one speaks of it, but Nefertiti remained, each loss stitched into her silence. You find yourself in her bath chamber now, a sunken rectangle lined with alabaster, dry and cracked. She would have soaked here, oils and petals floating around her like drowned offerings. And while she bathed, decisions were made in other rooms. Decisions she had already shaped. They say Cleopatra was seductive, but Nefertiti? She was strategic. She didn't need to seduce. She made herself irreplaceable. And when that failed, she vanished. But we're not there yet. Not quite. For now, we're still in the bath. Still breathing the aroma of lotus oil, crushed rosewood, and the lingering smell of papyrus ink drying on a death warrant. Because politics in ancient Egypt wasn't a game. It was a perfumed war. And Nefertiti? She was its undefeated general, wrapped in linen, crowned in blue, smiling softly as the world slowly bent around her. You walk now into a chamber that feels softer, less political, less sharp. The air shifts. Here, the walls aren't etched with smiting scenes or sun rays or golden altars. They're painted with play, little hands, bare feet, laughter captured in still frames of ancient pigment. This is not the domain of gods or kings. This is the domain of children. More specifically, 6 daughters. The 6 living branches of Nefertiti's mortal legacy. You see them everywhere in Amarna's reliefs, climbing into her lap, holding hands with their father, dancing under the open gaze of Aten, each one lovingly named, beautifully adorned, and carved with far more intimacy than any royal child before them. Meritaten, the eldest, poised and watchful. Meketaten, the tender-eyed. Ankhesepitan, the one whose name, some say, would become Ankhesenamen, queen of the boy king. Nefertiti Tashrit, named after her mother, a smaller echo of something already too perfect. Neferneferur and Setepinra, the youngest, still wrapped in innocence when their names began to fade. 6 girls, no sons, and in Egypt that mattered. You linger at a low relief. It shows Nefertiti cradling one of her daughters, Meketaten, perhaps, as the child's face tilts upward, smiling, or maybe coughing. The lines blur. In another, Akhenaten holds a tiny girl by the armpits as she leans forward to kiss him. An unguarded moment. A portrait of a family that, on the surface, seems almost modern in its affection. But even here, behind the soft eyes and chubby cheeks, the shadows gather. Because this room, this sanctuary of childhood, tells two stories. One, the royal couple loved their children fiercely. Two, the royal couple lost their children cruelly. At least 3 of Nefertiti's daughters died young, possibly more. Meketaten disappears from records after year 14 of Akhenaten's reign. Her image fades abruptly. In one surviving mural, she appears on a bier, motionless, surrounded by mourners. But here's the twist. No one names her death. No text. No funeral hymn. Just a painting. Just grief, etched in silence. Some speculate it was childbirth. Others say plague, the kind that crept silently into palace walls and didn't care for divine titles or Aten's blessing. You can almost imagine Nefertiti standing at the foot of that stone bier, flanked by sun rays, watched by her husband, her remaining daughters hiding behind carved columns. The Queen of Light, who had mastered politics, perfume, and perception, now losing piece after piece of herself to a god who didn't intervene, who only watched, and still no sons, no boy to inherit the revolution, no golden heir to legitimize Akhenaten's cosmic vision. Only girls, soft, bright, vulnerable girls. But then, like a secret stitched into history's sleeve, a boy appears. Not in Nefertiti's arms, but in the shadows. Tutankhaten. You know him. Of course you do. You've seen his gold mask, his tomb, the flashbulb photos from 1922. But what you might not know is that he was born during the dying days of Amarna. Born in confusion, in contradiction. Was he Nefertiti's son? Possibly. Or maybe a younger wife's child. A half-brother to the princesses. No one agrees. Not because they haven't tried to solve the puzzle. Oh, they have. DNA tests, tomb inscriptions, skeletal analysis. But Egypt guards its secrets better than any tomb. What we do know is this. After Akhenaten died, and the city of Amarna began to crumble into sunlit ruin, Tutankhaten was still alive, and someone guided him. Someone taught him how to survive the political knife fight that followed the collapse of Aten's regime. Someone helped him pivot, renouncing his father's god, changing his name to Tutankhamen, and restoring the old ways. Was that someone Nefertiti? Some say yes, that she didn't die when her daughters did, that she lived, changed her name, took power as pharaoh under the alias Nefertiti, that she ruled alone, or as regent, or as a ghost behind the throne of a golden child. Others say she died in sorrow, in silence, surrounded by too many tiny coffins and not enough answers. Either way, one truth remains. The boy survived, and he didn't survive alone. Someone whispered in his ear. Someone taught him how to wear the mask, how to walk the knife's edge between yesterday's gods and tomorrow's lies. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was the woman who had already survived so much more. The woman who knew how to rule through silence, how to wield power behind smile, how to survive without sons and yet never be forgotten. Because even in death, her daughters' names fade. But hers still lingers. Like perfume, like blood, like something sacred you can't quite explain. Her titles were embroidered in gold, chanted by priests, carved into stone so fine it cracked under sunlight. She was the great royal wife, the mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, the lady of all women, and, perhaps most telling of all, the one who pacifies the king. Romantic? No. Useful? Absolutely. Because in ancient Egypt, royal marriage wasn't a matter of love. It was political chess played with living pieces. And Nefertiti was a grandmaster. You find yourself in what was once the throne room of Amarna's great palace. The roof is gone, and the floor is broken. But the shadows of grandeur remain. Low reliefs still cling to the walls. Sun rays, offerings, bundles of lotus, and always, always the king and queen seated together, side by side, crowned, revered. This was no ordinary partnership. Nefertiti wasn't just the consort. She wasn't a background ornament or a decorative one. She was co-sovereign, appearing in ceremonies, leading worship, smiting enemies in battle scenes. Yes, smiting as in wielding weapons against foreign powers. That wasn't just radical. That was unprecedented. And yet, in Egypt's carefully constructed world of order and symbolism, it worked because she made it work. The truth is, Akhenaten was complicated. Some saw him as a visionary, others as a fanatic. Most couldn't figure out which. But even visionaries need someone to translate their madness into action, to manage the court, to negotiate with generals and governors who didn't worship sunlight, but still controlled swords. That someone was Nefertiti. She played the role of divine wife flawlessly, draped in layers of linen so thin they clung like breath, crowned with a distinctive blue flat-top crown, a style no queen before her had dared to wear. It wasn't decorative. It was deliberate. That crown looked like a king's crown. It told everyone in the room, I'm not just beside the throne. I am the throne. And maybe they listened. Maybe they bowed. But not all of them. Because even in the golden corridors of Amarna, power was never smooth. Behind the scenes, the palace writhed with silent wars. Between the new priests of Aten and the old believers. Between daughters maneuvered into dynastic marriages and mothers clinging to political leverage. Between generals who missed the good old gods and scribes forced to learn new prayers. And Nefertiti? She didn't just survive this. She played it. When Akhenaten's policies began to strain the empire, when foreign alliances crumbled and grain shipments slowed, someone had to step in and keep the machinery turning. Letters from foreign kings survive to this day, written in desperation, asking why diplomatic gifts have stopped, why promises have not been kept. Akhenaten ignored them. Nefertiti may not have. You can imagine her now, seated at a low desk, the cool clay of diplomatic tablets pressed under her fingers. Her scribe waits silently. A line of officials stands just outside the curtain. She reads each plea, each threat, each bribe wrapped in formal language. She doesn't panic. She decides. And that's the difference. Because while Akhenaten soared higher and higher into his obsession with divine purity, Nefertiti remained on earth. She understood how much of Egypt was mortal business. Keeping the grain moving, calming the governors, managing the temple-to-palace economy without triggering rebellion, marrying daughters to stabilize power, making real decisions, all while pretending, always, that this was Aten's will, not hers. And yet, we see the cracks. In later depictions, she doesn't just stand beside Akhenaten. She stands alone. She wears the blue crown. She receives offerings. She appears with no king beside her. It's as if she's practicing for something, preparing, rehearsing. Some scholars believe she briefly ruled after Akhenaten's death, that she took a new name, Nefertiti, and stepped fully into Pharaoh's sandals. Others say no, it was a different person, a daughter, maybe a half-sister, a puppet. But if you ask the dust, if you ask the stones, the silent murals, the rooms that still carry her shape, they'll tell you something different. They'll tell you Nefertiti ruled, quietly, sharply, and perhaps brilliantly. But she did so in a world that wasn't built for her to be remembered. She played the game to perfection, and in doing so, became too perfect to be believed. Because history doesn't always remember the women who ruled well. It remembers the ones who made noise, or failed, or died dramatically. Nefertiti did none of those things. She simply vanished. No tomb, No funeral, no body, just a whisper, a title, and a face carved into eternity. Beauty was never just beauty, not in Egypt, not in Amarna, and certainly not for Nefertiti. It was a language, a weapon, a form of ritualized control, carefully sculpted, painted, perfumed, and performed. And no one spoke it more fluently than the queen, who could silence a room without raising her voice, because her face said everything her words did not. You're in her dressing chamber now. Well, what's left of it? A shallow alcove, half-walled, soft with powdery dust and sunlight that filters through collapsed lintels above. A breeze stirs. It smells faintly of crushed rose petals and the ghost of burnt myrrh. Faint, but there. There are no mirrors, not like yours. No polished glass. No silver-backed vanity. But in Egypt, they knew how to catch reflections. Thin discs of bronze, polished until they gleamed like captive moons. And in one of them, every morning, Nefertiti studied herself. Not for vanity, not just, but for survival. Because to be queen in the city of the sun was not simply to rule. It was to perform divinity, to become the sun's mirror, a living glyph, walking, breathing, radiating cosmic order. So she painted her skin with crushed red ochre and unguents made of honey, fat, and sacred oils. She lined her eyes in kohl, not just for allure, but for magic, protection. Each sweep of black was a spell against evil spirits, desert winds, and, perhaps most of all, scrutiny. And that iconic crown, the tall blue one, cylindrical and smooth like a torch turned toward the sky, that wasn't fashion. That was a claim. No queen before Nefertiti had worn it. No queen dared to. It was a crown of kings adapted, rewritten in shape and color to say, this is no ordinary woman. This is someone who belongs at the center of the cosmos. But beneath all the paint and linen and perfume, she was still flesh. She still bled, still aged, still lost children. And yet, she never let it show. In every depiction, her face remains untouched, uncreased, unchanging, a mask of eternal poise. Is it possible she demanded it? That every scribe, every sculptor, every painter who dared render her likeness was given strict instruction, no flaws, no shadows, only light? Or did the artists decide it for her? Did they, in their quiet awe, craft her into something untouchable? Either way, the result is the same. Her image has become a myth in itself. Even her famous bust, found buried in a sculptor's studio, never finished, never meant to be seen, reflects not humanity, but an ideal. A visual gospel written in limestone. One that says, this is what a woman in power must look like. Flawless, silent, controlled. And isn't that the trick? Because once your beauty becomes divine, your humanity is no longer welcome. No wrinkles, no grief, no doubt, just symmetry. And in Egypt, symmetry was everything. It was sacred geometry. It was order, harmony, truth, Ma'at. And Nefertiti embodied it. Not just in her face, but in her posture, her gestures, her very being, the way she tilted her chin, the softness of her wrist as she poured a libation, the precision with which she walked, always precisely behind Akhenaten, but never too far. But don't mistake it for submission. This was choreography. In the ritual theater of Amarna, beauty was not frivolous. It was the script, the stage, the spotlight. And Nefertiti? She was all three. Yet for all her perfection, she was not universally loved. There were whispers. Even as she ruled, there were mutterings behind veils and lattice windows. She is too powerful. She wears the king's crown. She has no sons. She is not Egyptian enough. She has forgotten the old gods. And still, her image was everywhere. In reliefs, on stele, carved into temples now swallowed by sand. Her eyes, long, almond-shaped, eternal. Her mouth, perpetually on the verge of a knowing smile. She became so beautiful that people stopped asking if she was true and started wondering if she was ever real. Because real women age, real women weep, real women leave traces, journals, letters, anecdotes, bones. Nefertiti left only her reflection. But maybe that's the point. Maybe in a world where power slips through fingers like desert dust, the only thing that lasts is the illusion. And so, every morning she would sit in her chamber, look into that bronze mirror, apply her sacred paints, adjust her crown, and make herself disappear, not into death, but into iconography. Because when you rule with your face, when your beauty becomes your legend, your soul is no longer yours. It belongs to the mirror, and the mirror, like the Nile, remembers everything. It happens without warning. No drumroll, no fading lights, no final proclamation etched into gold leaf or whispered from temple stairs. She is simply gone. Year 12 of Akhenaten's reign. The murals still show her smiling. The sun's delicate hands still stretch toward her lips with sacred breath. The priests still kneel. The daughters still circle her like petals around a rose. Everything looks normal. And then, nothing. No funerary texts. No tomb inscriptions. No royal decrees announcing mourning. No public grief. Just absence. A cold, surgical absence. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that creeps in through the back door of history and closes it behind her. You feel it before you understand it. Here in the ruins, the air has shifted. Her name, the one that once pulsed like blood through every wall of Amarna, has thinned, faded like perfume that's lingered too long in sun. Where did she go? Some believe she died, quietly, naturally, perhaps of illness, perhaps from grief, perhaps from the sheer pressure of being more than human for too long. Others whisper more violently. Poison, palace intrigue, a soft assassination hidden beneath silken veils and diplomatic niceties. And then, of course, there's the theory that has refused to die. She didn't die. She transformed. That she shed her name like a skin. That she took up the mantle of Pharaoh Nefertiti, a new name, a new identity, a new crown. That she ruled in her own right for years, possibly in secret, possibly openly, possibly as a ghost in a blue crown no one dare question. But let's stay with the vanishing for a moment, because vanishing is its own kind of power, its own kind of weapon. In a culture obsessed with death as theater, with mummification, with tombs the size of cities, with elaborate spells to guide your soul through the underworld, Nefertiti's absence is deafening. Egyptians believed that to speak a name was to give it life. And for decades after her disappearance, her name is barely spoken. It's not just a silence. It's a chiseled silence. Intentional. Surgical. Like someone walked through the royal archives with a blade and a bottle of whitewash. We know this because her name, once proudly carved beside Akhenaten's, is scratched away in places. Not crudely, not sloppily, professionally, with care. Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. To erase someone not by destroying their body, but by unmaking their story. And yet, she resists, because even when her name is erased, her image remains. Unlabeled, unclaimed, but instantly recognizable. That face, those eyes, that impossible stillness. It's as if the stone refused to forget her, even when the scribes did. So what happened in year 12? Let's imagine. The queen rises before dawn, as always. She bathes in rose water and frankincense. A servant brushes her hair. Another places her ceremonial robe across her shoulders. The light creeps into her chamber like a tide. The city is quiet. Even the guards look uneasy. Perhaps she knows it's her last day. Perhaps she walks slowly, deliberately, as if etching each step into the earth. Perhaps Akhenaten watches her with something unreadable behind his hollow eyes. Perhaps one daughter clutches her sleeve, not understanding. Perhaps nothing happens at all. And then, she's gone. No burial site. No canopic jars. No mummified remains. Her tomb, if it ever existed, has never been found. And Egypt is full of tombs. They find one every other week. But hers? Nothing. Some believe she was buried hastily, or in secret, or in a tomb meant for someone else. Some say her remains lie in tomb KV-35, mutilated, unrecognized, her skull shattered beyond repair, a ghost labeled as the younger lady. Others believe she's still out there, whole, untouched, hidden beneath a chamber wall in the Valley of the Kings, waiting. But perhaps the greatest truth is that she left no tomb because she left no death, not in the traditional sense. Perhaps she walked out of the story, choosing erasure over legacy. Or maybe she chose legacy in another form, one not written in bones, but in myth. Because absence can be more powerful than presence. A disappearance can birth more legends than a coronation ever could. And Nefertiti? She didn't need a funeral to be immortal. She just needed to vanish well, to leave behind a face no one could forget, a silence too sharp to ignore, and a question no one could answer. Where did she go? Maybe into the sand, maybe into the throne, maybe into the mirror, or maybe she's still here, etched into your memory now, whispering in the wind that coils through Amarna's empty halls. Not dead, not forgotten, just waiting. Gold is a lie. At least, that's what the priests used to say in Thebes. That gold doesn't age, doesn't bruise, doesn't rot, and therefore cannot be trusted. And yet, when it came time to bury kings and crown gods, what did they reach for? Gold. Always gold. Not because it told the truth, but because it hid it. And if anyone was ever wrapped in golden myth, it was Nefertiti. You're walking now through the half-collapsed shell of what may have been a royal vault. The columns have cracked. The roof is caved. The walls are blank. But something shimmers just beneath the surface of your perception. It isn't sunlight. It isn't reflection. It's suspicion. Because for all we know about Nefertiti's rise, her power, her beauty, what we know about her end is a riddle wrapped in ceremonial linen and sealed with state-level secrets. Here's what they found in Amarna. Gold fragments, bracelets, a shattered pectoral necklace, tiny inlays of lapis and carnelian, a headdress broken at the base, its uraeus, royal serpent, snapped off as if someone, somewhere, had had enough of its arrogance. But no body, no coffin, no sarcophagus, no mourners frozen in a death mask of grief. Just ornaments, like a costume stripped from its actor when the curtain fell too fast. And that's the thing about gold. It doesn't decompose. It just waits. And what it waits for is meaning. So Egyptologists rush to assign it, to name these pieces, to catalog them, to fit them into a story where Nefertiti had died nobly, beautifully, somewhere between power and eclipse. But the pieces refuse to align, because every clue they find seems deliberately scrambled. Gold jewelry made for a queen, found in a tomb meant for a king. Canopic jars carved with her likeness, stored in a chamber that was never sealed. A pair of gilded sandals, missing their mate, too small to fit anyone but a woman of high rank. These fragments whisper one thing over and over again. She was here, but they never say where she went. It's as if someone dressed her for burial, and then changed their mind. Or worse, was stopped. Some believe her body was buried, then later moved. Hidden, desecrated. Others think she was never buried at all. One theory, that Nefertiti died as pharaoh, ruling under the name Enkhepurur Nefertiti, and that after her death, the new regime, eager to scrub the revolution from history, destroyed her tomb and erased her name. Another darker theory, that she was murdered, silenced by those who feared what a ruling woman might become. That the gold we find is all that's left after a carefully orchestrated unmaking. But the most seductive theory of all, that Nefertiti never died at all, that she became myth on purpose, that she foresaw the collapse, felt the old gods scratching at the door, knew that Akhenaten's city, for all its sunlight and purity, was built on sand, and chose instead to disappear into legend, intact, not embalmed, not wrapped, not painted and posed with a funeral smile, but unclaimed, untraceable, untouchable. Because here's the bitter truth no scholar wants to say out loud. Egypt is full of gold, but gold lies. It glitters in the dark, promising legacy, but conceals just how quickly memory crumbles beneath it. And Nefertiti? She used gold like a magician uses smoke, not to reveal herself, but to vanish. Every scarab, every diadem, every fragment pulled from sand and sealed in plexiglass today is not a breadcrumb leading to her truth. It is a decoy. She left behind just enough to keep us looking. A blue crown, a carved eye, a shattered mirror, a series of absences more potent than any tomb. Even the gold, that most immortal of earthly things, feels like it's tired of pretending. You reach down in the dust. Your fingers graze something smooth. A bead, still warm from the dream. You lift it to your face. It smells like lotus, and secrets, and a woman who never wanted to be found. Because in the end, Nefertiti may not have wanted to be remembered for how she died, but for how perfectly she vanished, wrapped not in linen, but in questions. The name drips off the papyrus like melted honey. Enkhepurur Nefertiti, a name too long, too ceremonial, too convenient. It appears suddenly in the historical record, just as Nefertiti vanishes. A name both familiar and foreign, wearing royal titles, issuing decrees, seated on thrones, worshipped like a pharaoh, but whispered about like a shadow. So let's ask the question that no one in the temples dared to speak aloud. Was Pharaoh Nefertiti Nefertiti in disguise? You wouldn't be the first to wonder. Historians have argued for over a century. Some say it was her daughter. Some say a male co-regent. Some say a political placeholder, a puppet wearing a crown until the boy king Tutankhaten was old enough to sit up straight. But what if it was her? What if, after Akhenaten's death, perhaps sudden, perhaps planned, Nefertiti took the throne not as queen, not as widow, but as ruler? Pharaoh, divine, unquestioned, alone. You feel it as you walk now through what was once a royal archive, a hall of shattered tablets, broken seals, clay letters never delivered. The names here swirl together like river silt, but this one stands out, Nefertiti. Beautiful are the beauties of Aten, a name so poetic, so close to Nefertiti's own throne name. It might as well be a mirror with a veil. And look closer. The titulary used in these inscriptions, effective for her husband, doesn't read like a man's. It reads like a woman writing in her own past tense. A queen claiming her place in a world that would rather forget she ruled. But in Egypt, power was never purely about biology. Pharaoh was not just a man. Pharaoh was a divine office, and any body that could wear its titles, speak its rituals, command its army, could become its vessel. And so, she may have done it. Nefertiti may have ruled as pharaoh, not as queen consort or mother of the air, but as the sun's embodiment on earth. wearing the full regalia, the double crown, the crook and flail, the kilted garments of kingship, perhaps even a false beard, braided and hung ceremonially from the chin like tradition demanded. Imagine the court watching, half in awe, half in terror, a woman stepping into the space only gods had occupied, and not any woman. Nefertiti, whose face they had once painted with devotion, now demanding obedience in the silence left by her dead husband. The transition wasn't smooth. Egypt was restless. The empire's outer territories were slipping. The grain stores were strained. The priests of the old gods, Ammonius, Osiris, Hathor, were sharpening their rituals like knives behind closed temple doors. And Nefertiti, now possibly Nefertiti, was holding it all together, with no precedent, with no heir, with nothing but will and strategy and light. Some believe she ruled for 3 years. Others say as many as 6. Her edicts were signed with dual names. Her figure appears in temples, still feminine, but crowned with the authority of kings. But here's where it gets sinister, because just as she once appeared, Pharaoh Nefertiti also disappears. And this time, the silence is colder. No record of death, no royal burial, no peaceful transition, just a name erased, a tomb half prepared, then abandoned, a rain struck through like a typo in stone. Some say she was overthrown. Others suggest she stepped aside, quietly handing the crown to Tutankhaten as he was renamed and reshaped into the savior of tradition, Tutankhamun. But others, more cynical, perhaps more honest, believe she was erased because she proved too much. Too capable, too elegant, too sovereign. A woman who ruled as pharaoh without collapsing the sky. And that, for some, was simply unacceptable. So they erased her, one chisel stroke at a time. And now, she survives only in fragments. Stone shards that say too little. Letters unsigned. Statues with lips that once spoke, but whose names were deliberately carved out with precision. So what are we left with? A name too long, a mask too perfect, a pharaoh too mysterious to be safely remembered, and a queen who may have ruled in drag, not because she wanted to hide, but because the world refused to see her as she truly was. Power incarnate. You descend now into the Valley of the Kings. The air thickens. The sun, once your tyrant in Amarna, now becomes a memory, muted by shadow, swallowed by stone. This is a world of silence. Not the empty kind, the curated kind, the kind that was arranged, polished, sealed with resin and sacred geometry. A tomb is not a grave in ancient Egypt. It is a machine for eternity, a place where architecture becomes theology and every wall tells you how to die properly. But tonight, you're not here to die. You're here to look for someone who never left the instructions behind. Her tomb has never been found. You've heard that before. That Nefertiti, the most iconic woman in ancient history, left behind no mummy, no chamber, no funeral mask. But what if that's not entirely true? What if she was found, and someone decided it was better not to say it aloud? Enter KV-35, a tomb meant for Amenhotep II. It was repurposed, reoccupied, reused. A kind of royal storage unit for bodies after grave robbers had made the valley a tourist trap for ancient thieves. Among the corpses discovered inside was a mummy archaeologist called the Younger Lady. Unidentified, unlabeled, a mess of shattered bones, a crushed face, broken ribs, and a long, haunting question mark wrapped in linen. DNA tests, modern, sterile, clinical, linked her to Tutankhamun. She was his mother. That much we know. But who was she? Some claim she was Kia, a lesser wife of Akhenaten, a woman whose name barely appears in the records. Others suggest a completely unknown consort, someone who never ruled, never smiled from a throne, never bore a crown. But then there are those quieter voices, braver ones, who say, this was Nefertiti. And if that's true, then her ending was not royal, not beautiful, not fitting, because this body, this shattered skeleton, was not laid to rest in gold. She was found naked, her wrappings in disarray, her left cheekbone smashed, her thorax torn open post-mortem, possibly by ancient robbers or deliberate desecration. Her arms not folded in the royal pose, but broken, abandoned. No adornments, no inscriptions, no shrine to her name, just silence and trauma. And maybe that's what terrified the archaeologists. Because to find Nefertiti like this, uncrowned, unmourned, unwanted, was to confront a truth history didn't want to preserve. That the most powerful woman of her age might have died, not as a god, but as a problem, a complication, something to be buried quickly and quietly. Because if she had ruled as pharaoh, if she had dared to take the crown alone, then there were those who would have seen her not as a queen, but as a usurper. And in Egypt, usurpers don't get golden tombs. They get erased. So maybe the smashed bones in KV-35 are not the remnants of a forgotten concubine, but the final act of vengeance against a woman who rose too high. And here's the quiet horror. We'll never be sure, because the past guards its secrets with teeth, and the bodies, when they speak, do so in riddles. You stare into the cracked skull. The orbit of her left eye is gone. There is no face, just bone, just loss. And yet, somewhere in the stillness, you recognize her, not because of evidence, not because of DNA, but because something inside you knows. This is not just a mummy. This is a refusal to be remembered on someone else's terms. A refusal to let beauty be the only thing that lasts. A refusal to be boxed, labeled, sorted, and shelved by the same historians who never knew how to write her story in the first place. Because maybe Nefertiti didn't want to be found in gold. Maybe she wanted to be found in ashes, in fragments, in doubt. And in that, she succeeded. Because every time someone steps in a KV-35, every time they lift a brush and touch that bone, they whisper the same impossible question. Is this her? And the silence answers back. What if it is? Sand has no loyalty. It doesn't care for dynasties. It doesn't distinguish between temples and latrines. It swallows everything. Palaces, gods, ambitions, and then burps up only fragments centuries later, daring us to make sense of them. But curiously, sand never buries gossip. It preserves it, like a jealous archivist. It hoards the whispers, the rumors, the half-truths that scurried through ancient corridors long after the monuments had crumbled. And Nefertiti, more than any other woman in ancient history, has become a goddess of this ancient gossip mill. You walk now through a field of sun-bleached ruins where the walls have collapsed, but the echoes have not. Each gust of wind feels like a half-told secret brushing against your ears. Each footprint you leave kicks up questions older than nations. Everyone had something to say about her, even those who never met her, especially them. The priests said she abandoned the gods. The diplomats said she manipulated the king. The artisans said she never aged, or at least no one was allowed to carve her that way. And the people? They said she had power too strange to name. She walked like a song. She smiled like someone who knew what would happen 5 years from now. She looked you in the eyes, and somehow you felt seen and dismissed in the same breath. Even the servants, yes, even them, passed on their versions. That she bathed in oils warmed by sunlight. That she slept under linen perfumed with crushed lotus and myrrh. That she only cried once when her second daughter died. And that the sound was so soft it didn't even wake the doves in the courtyard. And then there were the darker stories. That she had her rivals poisoned and their names scraped from the palace walls. that she pushed Akhenaten further into madness with whispers by candlelight, that she made herself divine not by prayer, but by political surgery. These stories, of course, were never written down. They were passed mouth to mouth, like folk songs or love spells. And somehow they survived, while her tomb vanished, while her body decayed or was disguised, while her name was blotted from inscriptions like spilled wine. The gossip stayed, because gossip, unlike facts, is immortal. It changes shape, it adapts, it survives the edit, and in that sense, it is history. You sit now beneath a broken column. The sun is low, the wind is cooler. You feel in your hair, your bones. Something wild, something ancient, something that doesn't want to be proven, only felt. This is what makes Nefertiti more than a queen. This is what makes her a myth with teeth. She didn't need a final chapter. She needed only fragments, rumors, gold dust, and broken mirrors. The truth was never her goal, only immortality through uncertainty. Because if you find her tomb, if you find her body, the mystery ends, and that, more than death, is the one thing she never allowed. So the sand keeps her, not in flesh, not in form, but in murmurs. The merchant who claims his grandfather once saw her skull. The scholar who swears her name is encrypted in Tutankhamun's tomb. The child who says she dreams of a woman with no shadow and a crown too tall to fit through doors. This is how Nefertiti lives now. Not in museums, not in textbooks, but in the soft, persistent rumor that she was too perfect, too powerful, too clever to die like anyone else. Sand eats everything. Temples, statues, bones. But gossip blooms in sand. And Nefertiti, she planted it well. You weren't supposed to rule. That's what they told you if you were born female in ancient Egypt. Not outright. No, the ancients were more poetic than that. They said things like the two lands need the strength of the bull, or Ma'at flows more smoothly through the voice of a man. But beneath the incense and metaphor, the message was clear. The throne was not yours. And yet, every so often, a woman took it anyway. Nefertiti wasn't the first. Before her, there was Sobinfru, daughter of Amenemhat III, who ruled at the twilight of the Middle Kingdom. She wore the crown. She held the crook and flail. She reigned, not as queen, but as pharaoh. Her name was etched into the annals. But when she died, so did her dynasty. As if the land itself said, that was enough of that. And then came the woman who cracked the system open. Hatshepsut, you stand now at the edge of a dream temple. One not built by Nefertiti, but carved into the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. The light softens. The wind sighs across the desert like a priest too tired to chant. You can almost hear Hatshepsut's voice, elegant, amused, precise. She didn't steal power. She grew into it, first as regent for her stepson, then quietly, almost tenderly, as pharaoh. She didn't just rule, she redefined rulership. She expanded trade, built monuments, wore the false beard, yes, but more importantly, she wore confidence. And yet, after her death, her stepson, Thutmose III, chiseled her from history. Literally, her name was removed from temples, her statues smashed, her images recut to resemble men she never met. Sound familiar? Now, return to Nefertiti. Imagine her standing in the rubble of Amarna as the dream crumbles. Imagine her remembering Hatshepsut. She would have known the risks. She would have seen the pattern. To rule as a woman in Egypt, you could be clever. You could be beloved. You could be powerful. But you could never be remembered intact. Still, she tried. She wore the crown. She stood alone on the stone platforms where kings prayed to gods that no longer answered. She used her beauty not as decoration, but as weaponized legitimacy. a visual prophecy made flesh. But unlike Hatshepsut, she didn't build her legacy in limestone. She built it in smoke and suggestion. Because Hatshepsut left us temples, Nefertiti left us a face. A bust in Berlin with no name, no inscription, just perfection. And maybe that was her version of rebellion. Not to endure through monuments, but through absence that refuses to be ignored. But here's the twist. Egypt was a land of paradoxes. While women were rarely pharaohs, they were goddesses, wives of gods, divine mothers, and protectors of kings. Power clung to them, not overtly, not officially, but in the shadows, in the bloodline, in the bedroom. And Nefertiti took that subtle, soft power and made it visible. She stood beside Akhenaten not as an accessory, but as an equal, and then, perhaps, as a successor. She wasn't just a queen. She became a statement. If I must vanish, let it be in fire, not in failure. She walked the same thin line Hatshepsut once tiptoed, between reverence and rebellion, between visibility and erasure. And if Hatshepsut taught Egypt how to accept a female pharaoh, then Nefertiti showed them how to fear one. Because Hatshepsut's memory was erased by a son. But Nefertiti, her enemies were shadows, faceless, cowardly in their chisels. Even now, history struggles to contain her. Too powerful to be dismissed, too elusive to be claimed. She exists in that ancient twilight space once inhabited by Sobinfru and Hatshepsut, women who dared to wear the sun. But unlike them, Nefertiti took her myth with her. She didn't leave it behind in stone or scrolls. She took it into the sand and whispered to it, "Hide," and it did. So now, when we try to place her in the line of kings, when we try to crown her retroactively, when we argue over whether she ruled and how and when, we're playing her game. A game she learned from the women before her. A game she rewrote with silence. And if you listen carefully, beneath the rustle of linen and wind, beneath the cracked walls and the brittle reeds, you might hear her say, "I wasn't the first to wear the crown, but I was the first to become a mystery." The smoke rises in thin, elegant columns. You can't see its source, but you smell it before you move. Frankincense, myrrh, resin scraped from the bark of forgotten trees. Sweet, sacred, thick as breath in the throat. This is a temple, yes, but not the kind you'd expect. There are no ceilings, no shadowed sanctuaries, no gods carved into the walls. Only sunlight, pounding down like judgment from a sky that never blinks. This is a place of Aten, and Aten does not tolerate subtlety. He demands your prayers in broad daylight, where the world can watch you sweat. And here, in this impossible space, you see them. Priests draped in linen, so white it hurts the eye. Not the old priests, the ones that used to dance for Osiris or sing to Thoth. Those are gone, or silent, or dead. These are new priests. Lean, pale, too clean. They chant in a strange, rigid tone. Not joyously, not rhythmically, but as if following a manual none of them really understands. They are priests of the sun, and their god doesn't speak. Aten does not have a myth. No family, no battles, no funerals. He is not born. He does not die. He doesn't walk the earth or disguise himself as a goose or weep over lost children. He just shines. And so these priests, these functionaries of light, are not storytellers. They are performers of precision. Each offering they place is documented. Each bow is measured. Each breath is regulated, as if it might fracture the sanctity of this theatrical religion. And behind them, watching, is Nefertiti. She stands, as always, perfectly still, her arms raised in the gesture of reverence. The sun's rays stretch toward her, each ending in a human hand that offers her ink. the sacred breath of life. Only her, not the people, not the priests, just her. And here's where the hypocrisy curls in like smoke. Because this entire religion, the worship of Aten, was built on the foundation of purity, of divine light, of replacing corrupt traditions with sacred simplicity. Akhenaten had denounced the old gods for being bloated, political, manipulated by greedy priests. And yet, the Temple of Aten is no less political. It is performance without mystery, a sun god that shines equally on grain and grave, but speaks only to two people, Akhenaten and Nefertiti. This is not spirituality. This is control wearing ceremonial robes. You see it in the faces of the people. The artisans who sneak glances at the old symbols as they chip them away. The guards who stand rigid, knowing the wrong posture could mean exile. The old women in the markets who mouth secret prayers to Isis, hidden beneath their breath like contraband. Because the new religion isn't loved. It's enforced. And Nefertiti knows this. You see it in the set of her jaw, the stillness of her lips, the way she moves through the temple not as a believer, but as a custodian of spectacle. She smells the incense. She feels the heat. She watches the priest recite the same phrases over and over, like try to seduce a mirror. And maybe she wonders, do they still believe? Did I ever? Because Nefertiti wasn't a fool. She was raised in the politics of temples, in the manipulation of the divine. She knew that gods were tools, sharp, beautiful tools. And Aten? He was the sharpest of all, an untouchable god, a blinding god, a god that required no myths, only obedience. But in removing the myth, something else died. The old gods made room for the human. They grieved. They failed. They loved. Aten doesn't. He burns. So Nefertiti, once the queen of grace, of dance, of sensuality and story, becomes a high priestess of light and silence. No rituals of death. No festivals of rebirth. No hymns of forgiveness. Just rays. Just breath. Just the lie of purity, wrapped in linen and laced with smoke. And yet, through it all, she performs. She bows. She lifts her arms. She recites the words. Because that's what power demands. Belief, optional. Obedience, mandatory. And so the incense burns. The sun shines. The priests perform. And Nefertiti? She watches the god that never blinks and wonders what's more dangerous. A god who punishes, or a god who does nothing at all. You think history is written by kings, that it's carved by decree, declared with trumpets, signed with seals. But it isn't. It's written by men with brushes, chisels, pigment-stained fingers, and no names. Men who squatted for hours in flickering lamplight, whispering to limestone with every stroke. Men who, by accident or intention, made immortality happen. And for Nefertiti, her afterlife didn't begin with her death. It began with her image, the way her chin curved, the high arch of her brows, the delicate slope of her neck. Not just beautiful, engineered. You're standing now in what was once the private studio of Thutmose, court sculptor of Amarna. His tools are long gone, but their marks remain, etched into plaster, into memory, into the fragments unearthed and scattered across the museums of the world. This was the place where gods were built, not born, built. And Nefertiti was his masterpiece. Among the rubble, there is one room, one alcove, where time seems reluctant to enter. Its walls hold no color now. But once this room held the bust. You know the one. Of course you do. Even if you've never seen it in person. That impossibly symmetrical face. That serene, unreadable gaze. That gaze that has outlived empires. What no one tells you is that the bust was never finished. One eye was never set. No inscriptions marked its base. It wasn't meant to be displayed. It wasn't a gift. or an altarpiece, or even a funerary relic. It was a model, a prototype, an eternal draft. And yet, it became the most iconic image of any woman from antiquity. Why? Because of Thutmose. He didn't just sculpt her. He translated her. He turned flesh into myth, breath into geometry. He captured something that even Nefertiti herself might not have fully understood. The tension between visibility and power, between silence and sovereignty. And through his hands, she became immortal. But don't mistake this for worship. It wasn't love. It was work. It was craft. It was the act of an artisan who knew that gods were not born. They were manufactured one chisel strike at a time. And perhaps that's why she chose him. Not a priest, not a scribe, not a poet, a sculptor. Because when the temples fell and the scrolls turned to dust and the names were chiseled out of stone, it was art that remained. And she knew that, in her world, being remembered wasn't about truth. It was about image. Let the scholars argue over timelines. Let the archaeologists dig themselves into theories. Let the kings rot in their gilded sarcophagi. She would live through a face too symmetrical to be accidental, too delicate to be entirely human, too powerful to be ignored. And this was the secret Thutmose kept, that he wasn't just building a likeness. He was building a symbol. And symbols, unlike bodies, do not decay. You wonder now, standing in this broken studio, what Thutmose was thinking as he carved her lips. Did he see her as a woman, as a queen, as a client, or as something else? Did he know, deep down, that what he was making wasn't just art, but a ghost? A presence so exact, so eternal, that would outlive her name, her empire, and even her bones? Because here's the irony. While her titles were erased, while her tomb was never found, while her very existence was questioned, that bust survived, preserved in sand, found in a junked-out workshop room, whisked away to Berlin, lit like an icon, guarded like a saint. And today, she watches millions walk past, staring into their faces, saying nothing, but asking everything. Do you see me? Do you know me? Do you believe I rule? And maybe, just maybe, she doesn't need your answer. Because her plan worked. She is remembered, not for what she did, or who she birthed, or even how she died, but for how she looked, and what that look made people feel. Fear, awe, uncertainty, desire, power. This was the afterlife she chose. Not wrapped in linen, not buried in gold, but sculpted in silence and carried through time on the back of an image that refused to fade. The sun has set over Amarna. Finally, for the first time in your journey, you are allowed darkness, but it is not restful. It is not peace. It is a reckoning, because light, pure, austere, unforgiving light, was never meant to last forever. And the Aten, god of the disk, had no dusk ritual, no hymn for endings, only endless day. So when the night came back to Egypt, it came with teeth. It didn't knock. It kicked the doors down. And the gods, those old gods with their jackal heads and cow horns and blue-black feathers, came slithering back through the cracks in the sunlit walls, carrying knives, not literal ones, though some were sharp enough. These were ritual blades, blades of memory, blades of revenge, because Egypt had not forgotten, and it had not forgiven. You are walking now through the ruins of an old granary outside Amarna, stone walls low to your hips, once filled with wheat and barley under Aten's divine gaze. But this place did not survive the night. Few places did. When Akhenaten died, however he died, the cracks that had been papered over with sunlight and incense split wide open. The old priesthoods, exiled or silenced for years, came back with quiet fury. Temples were reopened, scrolls recopied. The names of gods once cursed were restored. And Akhenaten? His name was not just erased. It was defaced literally, carved out of stone, hammered into oblivion, replaced with silence. Statues of him were smashed, buried, recycled into foundation stones for new temples. Even his mummified body, wherever it may have been, was likely desecrated. The gods do not like being fired. And Nefertiti, if she was still alive, if she had taken the throne, if she had ruled as Nefertiti, she would have watched it all unfold. And if she had already died, then her memory too was dragged into this purge. Because the gods were not just reclaiming space. They were rewriting the narrative. Aten had no myth, no family, no emotions. But Ammonius? Ammonius had wrath. Osiris? Judgment. Thoth? Correction. They came back not just to reclaim their altars, but to restore balance to the cosmic story that had been tampered with. Amarna, that city of blinding light, became a quarry. Its temples disassembled, its homes abandoned, its roads overtaken by weeds and silence. The entire city was erased, not just physically, but spiritually, as if the land itself had been infected by the arrogance of monotheism. And in its place, Egypt rebuilt Thebes. Luxor, the old sanctuaries came alive with offerings and song again. The pharaohs that followed, Tutankhamun, Horemheb, didn't just reverse Akhenaten's reforms. They publicly condemned them. Tutankhamun, once named Tutankhaten, changed his name as a royal apology. His inscriptions grovel before the old gods, begging forgiveness for the sins of his father, not as a son, but as a political strategy. Because in this new world, having supported Aten was an accusation, and surviving it meant erasing your fingerprints from the revolution entirely. And Nefertiti? Her face survived, but her name vanished. There is no official mention of her in any of the restoration stele. No gesture pardon, no retroactive title. Her existence became dangerous, too complicated, too associated with heresy, too closely tied to an era Egypt had vowed to forget. And yet, she lingers, in the margins, in statues that look like her but were no names, in tombs where inscriptions were scratched away but never fully destroyed. She's a ghost that won't cooperate, a figure that refuses to conform to the roles history wants to assign. The loyal wife, the heretic queen, the failed pharaoh, the forgotten woman. She is none of these. She is something else, a reminder, a scar, that even in a world built on divine order, a woman once rose, equal to the sun, and was worshipped. And that memory, no matter how many knives the gods carried, could not be buried. So they tried to smother her in silence, to burn her name from the walls, to salt the ground where she once stood. But it didn't work, because you're still here, walking her empty city, breathing her dust, asking her name, and somewhere, perhaps in the place between myth and ruin, she is still smiling, not with vengeance, not with sorrow, but with the quiet satisfaction of a queen who knew that the gods may return with knives, but she would return with mystery. And mystery, unlike gods, never dies. You wake up cold, not because the desert night has crept in, but because you've just entered a tomb. No grand entrance, no golden light, just a narrow shaft, dark as memory. The walls are close enough to make you breathe differently. Closer still when you realize you're walking into someone's forever. And the name above this resting place is not Nefertiti's. It is the name of a child. Tutankhamun, the boy king, the accidental pharaoh, the apology Egypt made to itself after trying to erase the gods. But here's the secret. This tomb, this cramped, hastily painted, poorly ventilated box of eternity, might not have been meant for him. There are whispers, and not the usual kind. These come not from poets or priests. but from the scientists in their latex gloves, the ones who study brush strokes like confessions and measure bones as if deciphering guilt. And what they suspect, what some quietly insist, is that this was her tomb, Nefertiti's. Look again at the design of the burial chamber. It's awkward, unroyal. The angles don't make sense. The decorations are strangely minimal. And the art? It's too elegant for a child. Some of the figures appear to have been altered. Names scratched off. Headdresses repainted. Cartouches, those sacred ovals that held royal names, chiseled out and rewritten. Almost as if someone had died, and the tomb had already been prepared. And then, at the last moment, someone else was buried there instead. You see the outline of it. A queen buried in secrecy. Her name too dangerous to keep. Her image too recognizable to display. So they take her tomb. They modify it. They fill it with gold meant for a boy. And they bury him in her place. If this is true, if Nefertiti was ever meant to lie here, then this is not just a tomb. It is a theft, a betrayal of memory, a switch of destinies, the final act in a long, slow erasure. But here's the irony. Tutankhamun, despite all the gold, despite the mask and the lotus wreath and the fan made of ostrich feathers, was a footnote in history for over 3,000 years. A forgotten king, a name in a list, until someone opened this tomb. And now, he is the most famous pharaoh in the world. Why? Because of what was found with him. Jewels, statues, furniture, sandals worn by a boy who didn't live long enough to grow out of them. And most importantly, mystery. Mystery makes gods out of footnotes. And Nefertiti, whose body is still lost, whose tomb is still undiscovered, whose legacy was shattered and censored and stitched back together, might have orchestrated this, not intentionally, but by force of presence. You see, her disappearance made Tutankhamun's fame possible. Her absence is the shadow that haunts his legacy. Every time a child stares into the golden mask of the boy king, somewhere behind the eyes, she is watching, because even in death, she refused to be reduced. Even in burial, she disrupted the script. She was not where she was supposed to be. She was not who they said she was. She did not die, so much as withdraw. And maybe, just maybe, her body is still there, hidden behind a sealed wall, lying beneath untouched plaster, covered by layers of deliberate silence. Because there is still one theory whispered among Egyptologists late at night, over wine and dim lamplight, that a chamber lies behind Tutankhamun's tomb, unopened, unmapped, unseen, and within that space, quiet, perfect, forgotten, Nefertiti waits, not as a skeleton, not as a name, but as the final card in a game she began decades before, when she painted herself into the sun and walked into history sideways. So now, as you breathe the stale tomb air, as your fingertips graze the cool stone, you don't just stand in a tomb, you stand in a question shaped like a woman, framed in gold, shimmering behind walls that weren't meant to be broken. And until we find her, truly find her, Tutankhamun remains borrowed glory, a boy buried with a queen's story. And somewhere beyond these walls, her silence continues to speak. You shouldn't be here. That's the first thing you feel. Not because the guards are watching, there are no guards. Not because the tomb is sealed, it isn't, not really. But because the silence here is different. It's not just old, it's deliberate. This isn't the kind of silence that comes from 3,000 years of dust. It's the kind that was built into the stone, as if the walls themselves made a pact. Never to speak. You're in the Valley of the Kings now. The real one. The royal necropolis. Tucked between cliffs, scorched by the sun, and carved by time into a landscape of secrets. But this tomb, KV-35, wasn't part of your tour. It wasn't even marked on the earliest maps. It was rediscovered in 1898, accidentally, like most of Egypt's truth. And what it held wasn't gold. Not treasures. Not masks. It held bodies. A cache of mummies. A gathering of the dead. Shuffled and reburied hastily. Like someone trying to hide the evidence of a very old crime. Among them, 3 bodies laid together, oddly arranged, unevenly documented, and wholly unsettling. The one in the center was easy to name, Amenhotep II. King, known, cataloged. But the one to his left, and the one to his right, that's where the story trembles. One of them was a woman. Her body had been mutilated, arms broken, face smashed, embalming done in haste. Whoever buried her wasn't preserving her. They were disguising her. But even with her injuries, her body told a story. Her proportions, her age, her lineage. She was royal. Too royal to be here without explanation. Too royal to have been buried like this. Naked, unmarked, stripped of titles and offerings. And too familiar. Some began to whisper, quietly at first, that this woman, this silent, broken figure in the dark, might be Nefertiti. No one could prove it. No one could disprove it. CT scans are taken. DNA analyzed. Scholars argued over cheekbones and calcified arteries. The mummy was labeled, the younger lady, a name that means nothing, a placeholder for a truth too radioactive to touch. Because if this was Nefertiti, then the implications were volcanic. It would mean her body had been dragged from its tomb, hidden, desecrated, placed beside Amenhotep II like a forgotten relic, stripped of the majesty she had so carefully constructed in life. It would mean that history had done what Aten's priests couldn't. It buried her without dignity. But it would also mean that she had been found, after centuries of myth, after whispers and busts in broken tombs. Her body would have been lying here, next to us all along. And still, the question haunts, because there is another theory, one even more tantalizing, more unprovable, more filled with that quiet, seductive substance known as hope. Some believe that her tomb is still out there, unfound, untouched, perfect, a burial chamber built in the golden years of Amarna, sealed with ritual, painted with light, lined with the names they tried to erase. It would be a tomb like no other, not carved by politics, not dictated by dynastic compromise, but a tomb that would restore her. Some even believe it lies just beyond Tutankhamun's tomb, hidden behind an unbroken wall, a corridor sealed in plaster, guarded by nothing but fear. For years now, archaeologists have scanned the walls, peered with radar, whispered with instruments, and each scan comes back the same. Inconclusive, suggestive, promising, but not proof. So we wait, like pilgrims outside a locked temple, like dreamers whose gods have gone quiet. We wait for a wall to crack, for a chamber to open, for the tomb that shouldn't exist to finally surrender. Because if it's real, if that tomb still waits behind the veil of earth, then it would not just reshape Egyptology, it would rewrite history. It would confirm what the dust has always known, that Nefertiti was never truly lost. She was withholding, not forgotten but in hiding, not defeated but preparing. And when we find her, if we find her, she won't need gold. She won't need fanfare. All she'll need is a name. The name they tried to chisel away. The name she carried into the light. The name that still echoes in the bones of this valley, carried by the wind through canyons that remember every step she took. Nefertiti, the beautiful one has come, and she's still waiting for us to realize she never left. You used to know what heaven looked like. It was painted on tomb walls, bright as sunrise, orderly as a hymn. A golden field where the soul harvested wheat. a river that shimmered with lotus blooms, a judgment hall with 42 divine inspectors, asking you to confess in exquisite detail what you hadn't done. You had a heart, you had a feather, you had a god with the head of jackal. And if your heart weighed more than that feather, well, there was a crocodile-line hippopotamus waiting to eat your soul. Welcome to the Do It. This was the ancient Egyptian afterlife. A moral test, a cosmic bureaucracy, heaven as a courtroom, measured, mythic, intimate. And then along came Aten, and suddenly heaven disappeared, because in Akhenaten's vision, and by extension Nefertiti's, there was no underworld, no jackals, no scales, no scrolls of the dead. There was only light. Aten's followers believed that the soul did not need to travel through the Do It. There were no serpents to slay, no books to recite, no mummified body to house the Ka. Instead, you returned to the sun. You merged with it. You became one with the radiant disk, wrapped not in linen, but in warmth, not in judgment, but in glow. It was elegant, abstract, devastatingly clean, and that terrified the old priesthoods. Because if there was no afterlife in the traditional sense, then there were no spells to sell, no rituals to perform, no gods to negotiate with on behalf of the dead. The economy of eternity was collapsed overnight. But for Nefertiti, ever the strategist, ever the image, this wasn't a loss. It was an opportunity. She began crafting a different heaven, one that didn't require burial scrolls or canopic jars, one that didn't depend on crocodile demons or feather scales, a heaven that didn't threaten, a heaven that seduced, and she placed herself at its center. Look again at the art of Amarna, those sun-kissed reliefs, those tender family scenes. You won't find the usual gods with falcon heads. Instead, you find her, Nefertiti, seated beside Akhenaten, receiving the life-giving rays of Aten, each one ending in a tiny human hand offering the ink. Not to the people, not to the priests, but to them. They were no longer intermediaries between humanity and the gods. They were the divine. And in this rewriting of heaven, Nefertiti becomes more than queen. She becomes a cosmic necessity. The sun no longer sets behind Osiris' throne. It sets on her face. She's no longer walking into the afterlife. She is the afterlife. But there's a cost to divine abstraction. Because the Aten, for all his light, offered no narrative, no comfort, no forgiveness. He did not cradle the soul. He absorbed it. And while Nefertiti sculpted this radiant religion, her people hungered for the old songs. They missed the gods who failed and bled and wept. They missed the comfort of knowing that even the divine could be humbled, could be tricked, could be loved. And in the end, that may be why Aten fell. Not because he lacked truth, but because he lacked story. Even Nefertiti, for all her elegance, couldn't narrate him. You see, humans don't just want light. They want meaning. They want gods who stumble, gods who listen. And when the night returned, when the old gods came crawling back with their knives and hymns, the people followed. Because in the end, you don't die into a philosophy. You die into a myth. And Nefertiti? She became one, not because she was divine, not because she rewrote the heavens, but because she dared to try, because she imagined a cosmos where death wasn't judgment, but union, not fear but light. And for a time it worked. For a time, heaven was hers. She didn't just live in it. She designed it, not as a reward, but as a mirror. And tonight, as you lie in your bed, and the last light fades from your ceiling, you understand. Heaven was never a place. It was an idea, a sacred arrangement of light and memory. And if that's true, if that's all it takes, then Nefertiti never needed a tomb. She carved her heaven in the minds of those who still whisper her name. And long after her temples fell, long after her sun dimmed, she still shines, Not above you, within you. You're standing in front of a wall, once white, now ghost-colored, smooth in places, chipped in others. Not a wall of beauty, but of absence. There is something missing. Not because the paint has flaked, not because time has chewed away the pigment, but because someone long ago came here with intent and chisel and decided that this wall must forget. And so it did. But you didn't, because this wall was never blank. It was made blank, and that's very different. You've seen her before, haven't you? Not in temples, not in scrolls, not in the annals of kings, but in everything they tried to destroy. Her name, once carved in golden cartouches beside Akhenaten, was hammered into silence, erased, smashed. Her face, once painted into prayers, was scraped until only outlines remained. Ghost sketches of a woman the gods refused to forgive. Nefertiti, queen, co-ruler, possibly pharaoh, but above all, erased. Not forgotten, no, that's far too gentle. She was targeted, systematically, ritually, politically. This wasn't the slow erosion of time. It was an execution in stone. Egypt has a word for this, damnatio memoriae. It means the damnation of memory. It means to kill a person twice, once in flesh and once in name. And it worked. Almost. For centuries, no one spoke of her. No tomb, no text, no legacy. Even her bust, the most famous sculpture in the world, was unsigned. No artist's mark, no inscription, just a face, as if the world wanted her beauty, but not her story. But here's the thing about stories. They don't need permission. They don't need truth. They just need someone to remember the shape. And someone did. Not the kings who came after. Not the priests who brought Ammonius roaring back into power. Not the architects who reused her temples for other names. But the dust, the silence, the stone that refused to stay quiet. A fragment of a statue, a shattered inscription, a torso labeled unknown royal woman, a mural with half a face. She was everywhere and nowhere, because that's what happens when you try to erase someone who had already become myth. She slipped into the gaps between records. She lived in the margins. She hijacked history by refusing to stay within it. And when modern archaeologists came with their brushes and books, they didn't rediscover her. She emerged on her own terms, piece by piece. A name, a crown, a rumor, a mystery, until one day, a bust was lifted from the ruins of a studio. Unmarked, unfinished, perfect. And suddenly, the world remembered. Not the dates, not the policies, but the power. Because here was a woman who was not supposed to rule, yet did. A woman who was not supposed to outshine her husband, yet did. A woman who was not supposed to become pharaoh, yet might have. And most dangerously, a woman who was not supposed to survive erasure, yet does. You feel it now, don't you? That haunting echo in your chest. That strange sense of recognition. That myth humming just under the skin of history. She is carved not in temple stone, but in the very act of removal. Every time her name was chipped away, her story grew sharper. Every time her image was defaced, her memory dug in. Every time the world tried to forget her, she became unforgettable. And so she lives here, not in monuments, but in mystery, in the pause before the archaeologist brushes away dust, in the silence between two conflicting inscriptions, in the unanswerable questions that keep Egyptologists up at night. She is the unfinished sentence, the footnote that outgrew the text, the ghost in every golden room. They erased her from stone, but they carve her into us. And now, in this moment, this quiet hour of sleepless wonder, as your breathing slows and your mind begins to blur at the edges, you realize she never needed temples. She never needed papyrus. She had the oldest form of immortality there is. She became a question, And questions, unlike monuments, do not crumble. There's a strange kind of ache that lives under forgotten names. Not a sharp pain, not a wound, but something slower, quieter, like a breath that never finishes. That's what it feels like to say her name now. Nefertiti. It rolls off the tongue like a spell. Elegant, elusive, eternal. You say it softly in the dark, and it feels almost forbidden, like you're whispering through time to someone who still has the power to listen. But names, especially in Egypt, were never just identifiers. They were magic, literal spells. Your name was your soul's anchor. To lose it was to vanish. To erase it was to kill you in the afterlife. Which means Nefertiti died twice. Once when her body left the world, and again when her name was carved out of history, scratched off tomb walls, scrubbed from cartouches. But what's curious is how carefully she's missing. Almost too carefully. You expect to find nothing. Instead, you find spaces, gaps, absences shaped exactly like her. A relief panel with two figures, one labeled Akhenaten, the other blank. A wall of names, skipping just one. A set of footprints in a tomb chamber, bare, feminine, leading nowhere. And then there's the name she used in the end, Nefertiti, a name that appears in later inscriptions, a name that ruled Egypt briefly, a name that might be hers. Might. That's the knife edge on which her memory balances. Because historians aren't sure. Some say Nefertiti was Nefertiti, ruling alone after Akhenaten's death. Others argue it was one of her daughters, or a co-regent, or a construct. No consensus, only fragments. And that's where the silence lives. Not in the absence of her name, but in the debate over it, in the hesitation, the footnotes, the perhaps and possibly, and scholars remain divided. It's as if her name was never meant to be spoken too clearly, as if history still fears what might happen if we pronounce it with too much certainty. Because what would it mean, truly mean, if the most powerful woman in Egyptian history ruled as pharaoh, without being named, without being crowned, without being allowed? What does it say about the world she lived in, and the one we live in now? You sit with this silence for a while. It's not empty. It's not still. It hums, like the pause between notes in a requiem, like the space between inhaling and exhaling, like the blank space where a name used to be. And then you realize she's still in there, beneath the erased glyphs, behind the missing cartouches, inside the contradictions. Her silence is not absence. It is resistance. She is not gone. She is guarded. And maybe she wants it this way. Maybe Nefertiti chose to leave behind a name you cannot hold. Only chase. A title that slips through the fingers like desert wind. A silence that feels louder than stone. Because when you cannot be named, you cannot be owned. And that is her final triumph. She escaped the very history that tried to contain her. She became not a record, but a riddle. Not a queen, but a question mark at the end of an empire. And questions, unlike queens, do not have to die. So tonight, when you close your eyes and whisper her name, whether it's Nefertiti or Nefertiti or nothing at all, you're not summoning a ghost. You're participating in her silence. You're letting the mystery breathe, letting her live not in facts, but in wonder. Because some names weren't meant to be remembered. Some were meant to be searched for, forever. Dust is not dead. It only seems that way when you sweep it off your windowsill, or wipe it from the spine of a forgotten book. But in Egypt, dust isn't debris. It's testimony. It remembers everything. Every grain is a witness. To footsteps, to collapse, to coronations whispered in candlelight and betrayals spoken in marble halls. It saw the moment when gods fell out of fashion, and women like Nefertiti rose, not as wives, but as forces, You're walking through Amarna now, not the grand, golden Amarna of palace columns and red ochre murals, but the Amarna that lives under the sand, its bones exposed by time and wind, its voice muffled beneath centuries of collapse. There are no tourists here, no velvet ropes or gift shops, only fragments, clay shards with half-legible hieroglyphs, sun-dulled talatap blocks with the edge of a royal chin, foundations that outline what was once a revolution in stone. And the dust, it remembers her, even if the scribes forgot, even if the kings that followed cursed her name in temples and scratched her story from walls. Because dust is patient. It does not argue. It does not obey. It preserves. You crouch beside what might have been a courtyard, a place where Nefertiti walked barefoot, where her children ran, their shadows dancing on limestone as Aten beamed down with his 10-fingered light. You reach down, brush your fingers through the fine sand, and you find a scarab, tiny, cracked, ordinary almost, except for the glyph, her cartouche, Nefertiti. It shouldn't be here. Most of these were destroyed, melted, buried, drowned beneath the return of ammonious priests and the reassertion of the old order. But this one slipped through. It survived. The dust protected it. Because that's what dust does. It settles quietly where eyes don't look. It burrows into the cracks between accepted history. It refuses to obey the edits of men who believe their version would be final. And when the wind is just right, and the light filters in at the soft angle between morning and eternity, dust rises, briefly, and tells the truth. That Nefertiti's story never ended. It was paused, archived beneath 1,000 layers of wind and willful forgetting. And now, the desert is breathing it back. Not all at once, not with trumpets or headlines, but with the quiet reveal of clues. A piece of jewelry that matches no dynasty. A mural with feminine hands lifted to the sun. A cracked seal with no king's name, only hers. The archaeologists call it pattern. The poets call it destiny. You call it what it is, a return, because the past doesn't stay buried. Not here, not where the dust still carries the memory of every breath Nefertiti took. And the dust remembers not just the queen, but the woman, the one who dared to look directly into the sun, the one who led beside a man, and perhaps beyond him, the one whose beauty was less about her face and more about her defiance. The dust remembers her footsteps, the softness of her linen, the words she said when no scribes were listening. And now, as night folds over the ruins like a linen shroud, you listen with your whole body, because this place, these broken stones, this breathless heat, is not silent. It is humming, with memory, with fragments, with her. And as the dust swirls gently around your ankles, as if tracing the outline of a forgotten throne, you realize something simple and unshakable. The people who chiseled her name away are gone. Their temples crumbled, their scrolls rotted, their stories dust. But she remains, in the wind, in the soil, in the cracked lips of every statue that still, somehow, looks like her. Because when memory fails, dust remains. And Nefertiti? She is everywhere the dust remembers. There are many ways to live forever. You can conquer. You can build. You can write yourself into law or carve yourself into scripture. But Nefertiti chose none of these. She chose a face. A single, immortal face. You've seen it. We all have. Even if we don't know her story. Even if we forget her name. That face, serene, symmetrical, impossible, lingers in our collective memory like a dream we never fully wake from. It was unearthed in 1912 in the ruins of an Amarna workshop, the studio of Thutmose, the royal sculptor, a place of broken statues and discarded pigments, except for one bust. Untouched, unfinished, unforgettable, eyes forward, lips parted slightly as if about to breathe. The long, regal neck, the blue crown of power, not just of a queen, but perhaps of Pharaoh. One eye missing, not by damage, but by design. A half-finished goddess. And yet, she looked more alive than any mummy. When the archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt found her, he wrote in his diary only one thing. It is impossible to describe. One must see it. He was right, because what you see is not just art. It is presence, command, a gaze that doesn't just invite attention, it demands it. Even now, over a century later, she remains a kind of mystery box. Why was she never completed? Why was she hidden, not displayed? Was a prototype, a personal piece, a secret too powerful to share? Some believe the bust was more than portraiture, that it was ritualistic, a vessel for the Ka, the vital essence of the queen, a spiritual insurance policy, not meant to be seen, meant to contain her. And maybe it still does, because once the world saw that face, it refused to look away. She became the face of ancient Egypt, not Cleopatra, not Hatshepsut, Nefertiti. Her image now rests in Berlin, in a glass case so clean, so pristine, that it seems like the oxygen itself has been filtered to accommodate her. People travel across the world to stand before her, only to leave feeling watched, as if she is still evaluating us, still waiting. For what? For recognition? For return? For the truth to finally emerge? Maybe all of them, maybe none, because her power lies in not being fully understood. Not by scholars, not by tourists, not even by the sculptor who tried to immortalize her. The afterlife she inhabits is not one of gods and judgment. It is one of myth and media. She has been in fashion ads, on coins, in comic books, projected on buildings, tattooed on skin. She floats through our collective dreams, equal parts queen and question. And yet, it's just a face. No tomb, no body, no papyrus scroll to explain the secrets behind that impossible symmetry. But maybe that's the point. Because what better immortality than to live in the gap between fact and fascination? What better legacy than to haunt the world? Not with what you did, but with who you seem to be. There are those who say the bust should be returned to Egypt. That was taken, displayed, and worshipped far from its home. And they're right. But Nefertiti's second life is not bound by geography anymore. Her face has crossed borders, languages, ideologies. She is everywhere. She is in the art student's sketchbook, in the archaeologist's thesis, in the dream of a little girl staring at her reflection, trying to make her chin tilt just so. Because once a face becomes legend, it no longer belongs to marble, or history, or even to the woman it once adorned. It belongs to all of us. And Nefertiti? She knew that. Of course she did. Why else would she leave behind only that? No words, no diary, no farewell, just a look, and it's looking still. Congratulations. You just reached the end of her story, or what's left of it. But don't expect a neat conclusion. This isn't that kind of tale. This is Egypt, where time folds back on itself, where gods wear masks, and where even the dead have secrets. They say Nefertiti died twice, once in body and once in memory. But that's not quite right, is it? Because memory, true memory, isn't the kind you write down. It's not housed in libraries or carved on pillars. It's felt, breathed, stirred by dust and shadow and longing. And Nefertiti? She became that. Her first death, the real one, the human one, came quietly as it always does. No fanfare, no golden chariot to the afterlife. Perhaps no ceremony at all. Some say she vanished from the record. Others say she became Pharaoh under a different name. A few whisper that she was murdered by those who feared a woman with too much light. But maybe, just maybe, she chose to disappear, to let the sun set on her own terms, to slip behind the veil and become myth. Instead of martyr, her second death came slowly, years after the Aten fell, after the old gods slithered back into their temples, after Akhenaten's statues were shattered, and the city of Amarna was left to choke on its own silence. That's when they began erasing her, one chip cartouche at a time, one line in the record, one face scratched off a mural, as if the mere act of forgetting could undo her reign, as if history were a chalkboard, and she could be wiped clean. But history doesn't forget easily, especially not women who burn too brightly. She survived, not because she was remembered, but because she was searched for, in rumors, in relics, in the haunting symmetry of a limestone bust unearthed in the rubble of her failed revolution. You've walked with her through temples, into tombs that weren't hers, through silence, through speculation, through gold and stone and dust. And what have you found? Not certainty, but something better. You found a presence. A woman who ruled beside a king and possibly after him, who reimagined the heavens, who turned the sun into her mirror, who disappeared from history and reappeared in dreams. You found a queen who left no tomb, no body, no last words, only a face, only a mystery, only a name that echoes louder because it was taken away. And perhaps that is her greatest triumph. Not that she lived, not that she ruled, but that she endured, that in a world built to forget her, she remained unforgettable. So now, as your eyes begin to soften, and sleep folds itself gently over your shoulders like linen in a royal burial, you ask, where is she? Where is Nefertiti? The truth? Maybe she's in a sealed chamber behind a wall in the Valley of the Kings. Maybe she's resting beneath rubble in Amarna. Or maybe she never needed a tomb at all because she found a better place to hide. In us. In every breathless gaze cast toward her portrait. In every whisper of her name when someone dares to believe that beauty and power can share the same crown. In every unanswered question that begins with, what if Nefertiti? She died twice, they say. But tonight, in this hour of half dreams and open skies, you brought her back again. And that is the secret her priests never knew. That immortality was not in the sun, or the stone, or the name. It was in the wondering. And as long as someone wonders, she lives. Good night, Queen. We still remember, and the dust still listens.